My name's Jenny Ann Bishop and I'm from Rhyl in North Wales, and unfortunately over the years I've been subjected to a number of hate crimes and hate incidents. Somebody once said to me, if you're trans it pervades your whole life, and they're absolutely right, it does. All hate crime and hate incidents have a much bigger effect on anybody, but particularly we feel it in our community because it challenges who you are, and it may prevent you in some cases from just going about your legitimate business. Some of our people spend far too much time at home because they feel afraid of going out either in the day because they think they may be seen, or at night because they're concerned about people who've been drinking or taking drugs, for instance. Within the transgender community, or we sometimes call it the trans community, there are unfortunately a wide range of hate crimes and hate incidents. Typically, people will get called tranny or queer on the street. Sometimes people will try and stop them going where they're supposed to be going. It ranges through to incidents where people are physically assaulted, or a friend of mine recently was doing her shopping at the supermarket, and when she came out, somebody in a car deliberately drove at her and didn't knock her down but grazed her deliberately, and that's pretty typical. A few years ago I was travelling by train and arrived at my destination station and was looking for a taxi. A taxi arrived and I went to get in, and somebody was sitting in the front of the car, and I thought, oh, they were just travelling around with the driver, but it turned out to be a passenger, and as soon as he heard me speak, he said, oh, you're a tranny, and was extremely abusive and threatening. And I said to him, if you carry on talking like that, I shall call the police. And he said, oh, don't be silly, and went on being abusive and was very up close and in my face. So I called the police, and he was very surprised but continued to be extremely derogatory and stupidly hung around until the police car arrived to arrest him. And he said to the police, I don't know why you're arresting me, I haven't done anything. In terms of incidents and crimes that people suffer, they're really quite wide-ranging. For instance, a lot of people's cars are damaged. Either they're marked and sometimes trannies written on them, or they're deliberately bumped and scratched. I lived in one area where I never cleaned my car for years because as soon as it looked clean and smart, it would get bumped. While it looked dirty and dejected, it got left alone, and that's very typical. Other people have had tranny written on the side of a house. They've had disgusting messages put through the letterbox. Sometimes lighted objects are put through the letterbox to try and set the house on fire. There can be a really severe impact from hate crime and even repeated hate incidents, that sometimes people will suffer from repeat incidents which often are so minor it's very difficult to keep reporting them, but they take their toll. It's like it's drip, 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 and it can make people feel suicidal or self-harming, or they don't go to work when they should, and all sorts of other things like harassment from the press will happen, and that means people can't go about their daily lives. A friend of mine who recently committed suicide because of the harassment she had at work, wasn't able to leave the house or arrive at her place of work without being pestered by journalists. And in the end, it took its toll. The other sort of incident sometimes can be very subtle incidents. For instance, a building inspector was sent round to say we hadn't got proper planning permission for our conservatory, which had been there about 10 years since before we bought the house. And it's just things like that that can be done. Another friend of mine went to the bank recently to set up a new account, and in spite of the fact that she has legal recognition of her new gender, the bank refused to set up an account for her unless she produced a gender recognition certificate, which is, it's not necessary to do if you've got a change of name document and evidence of where you live. That, like anybody else, is sufficient to change or set up an account. So it's that sort of subtle discrimination that goes on. It's very important that all hate crimes and hate incidents are reported, and I know sometimes that's very difficult for people, and it's why we have the support networks, so we can do third-party reporting, or somebody can come to the community house and meet with the police there to report a hate crime. And yes, quite a few people are unaware that what's happened is a hate crime or a hate incident, particularly if it's fairly low level. You know, if it's the local kids always calling you tranny every time you go out your house, then okay, that's not a crime, but it's a hate incident. And if it's reported enough to the police, they may just decide to patrol in that area when you want to go to work. People have trouble with those who are trans because it really gets at your fundamental idea of what it is to be a man or a woman, whereas everybody has elements of both, and gender is a very widespread between the two extremes. And of course there's a lot of confusion that people confuse sexuality with gender. They assume because I dress as a woman, it's because I'm gay and I want to have relationships with men but can't face being gay. It's not at all. I actually see myself as a lesbian and have relationships with women, but it's quite different to my gender identity as a woman. In terms of the community, understanding the severity of hate crime and hate incidents, I think it's equally bad amongst many minorities, but because trans is a fairly unusual hate crime, a lot of people don't understand A, what being trans is, and B, the effect that even quite minor incidents can have on people. To reduce them and to get people to understand is really about education, and it's why we do a lot of awareness training. Also, the media has already to a degree played its part in putting on some really good documentaries about being trans. On the other hand, some of the media is awful and makes fun of being trans, and that just reinforces bad attitudes. Where I think we really are going to change it, and it'll take years to do, is in educating the children about diversity. You know, it's rather the same as race equality was 30, 40 years ago. It was perfectly okay in most people's eyes to be racial. Now everybody knows it isn't, and most of that is because all the current generation have grown up with an education that says diversity is fine and equality is good, not people who are different are bad. It's that perception that we're going to be some sort of strange creature that they're going to have trouble interacting with, whereas we have exactly the same problems and dreams and hopes and enjoy exactly the same things as everybody else.